Welcome to the Journalism Innovation Podcast, where we bring you the most interesting perspectives and insights from media entrepreneurs and publishers at the heart of news innovation in Europe. I'm your host, Tara Kelly, and to kick off our first episode of our new podcast, we'll be discussing how to build an independent media brand with Zakhar Protsiuk. Zakhar is the Chief Operating Officer at the Kyiv Independent and the co-founder and managing editor at The Fix Media, a publication which focuses on cracking the media management puzzle in Europe. As an experienced publisher and consultant, Zakhar spoke to us about the media industry's talent conundrum, the power of pivoting in the news business, and what the latest conflict in the Middle East means for publications like the Kyiv Independent and its own coverage of the war in Ukraine. This podcast is part of the European Journalism Center's Journalism Innovation Network, a newly launched initiative for media entrepreneurs looking for a space to connect, learn, and thrive. To join, head over to ejc.net/network. This is all made possible with the support of the Google News Initiative. Now let's take a listen to our conversation with Zakhar Protsiuk. Zakhar Protsiuk, welcome to the Journalism Innovation Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So the Journalism Innovation Podcast is part of the Journalism Innovation Network. That it's a new initiative the European Journalism Center is launching, and we're really focusing on media entrepreneurship in Europe. And it's going to provide a space for people to connect and share knowledge around this issue. So, Zakhar, thank you so much for coming on today. You're the co-founder and managing editor of The Fix Media, but you're also the chief operating officer at the Kyiv Independent and based in Kyiv at the moment. So it's great to have you on to share, your perspective and all the different work you've done consulting for European publishers. And yeah, so thanks again for helping us launch this and coming on for the first interview.
Great to be here, and hopefully, my presence would not harm the launch.
I'm sure not. So, Zakhar, let's start off talking about The Fix, its purpose, and how does working with other European media organizations and inform the direction of your publication and you personally?
Yeah, thank you. So The Fix, maybe I'll take a step back and give a very quick one-liner of what The Fix is. So The Fix is a media about media, as we like it to say, right? It's a publication that is covering first and foremost the European media market, but with a few important caveats, I would say. The first one is we really, when we were launching it a few years ago, it was 2019/2020. The idea was very simple, right? The amount of knowledge about the news media industry available on the market is quite scarce. And even that knowledge that is present there is quite limited to the big English language markets like United States and United Kingdom to a lesser extent, but United States first, right? So there were projects like, Nieman Lab or Columbia Journalism Review back then, but they are quite focused around the markets they are present at. And the idea was essentially to create a publication that would be focused on Europe, but in a full sense of that word, right? Which includes the continental Europe, which includes, both Western, Southern, and Central and Eastern Europe, right? And brings a lot of innovative cases from those different markets. So that was one important caveat and differentiation with which we wanted to start The Fix, to have that geographical kind of differentiation. And the other one was to create a publication that would be focused on the kind of decisions makers' perspective, if I can put it this way, right? So there are different publications that were, kind of catering towards journalism first, towards, how do you write and stuff. And the idea was to create a publication that would be, about how do you make decisions in this industry. So it's slightly more focused towards media management rather than editorial part. And we write about, HR and media, strategy, business models, all those parts that are around content, around journalism, but they play a pivotal role. So those were the two important differentiations which we wanted to start the fix with. And what we saw in the next few years since launching is that there was a need for that. There was indeed a need for that and the desire to get that content and that knowledge sharing. And I think I'm quite proud of that kind of community we managed to build around the fix.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, you've also helped a lot of European media organizations before that, where you consulted for over 15 of them. And I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about, what you've learned from that and how that's informed your work at both the Kyiv Independent and maybe also the content that you guys commission at the Fix.
So my kind of consulting background is mostly focused around Central and Eastern Europe, and I would say the speciality of my work in working in the markets that have some sort of an turbulence going on. So the markets that are fun to work with, but not necessarily easy. So I work quite a lot. I'm from Ukraine and I'm based in Ukraine, and that isn't market that has a lot of vibrant and very difficult media scene. I work quite a few on different projects in Moldova, in Caucasus, and with the fix slightly in also in kind of Western Europe and UK. So I would say one lesson that I have consistently been taken away is that talent is a very important and big issue in this industry. The amount of strong, vibrant talent that is able to rethink and transform organizations kind of as they go, right? Because if you look at any startups, like let's say tech startups for the example, right? Most of them kind of launch around the idea of the people they build this product with, not necessarily of the product itself seen as the final destination for them, right? Like they transform their organizations on the go, looking at the market, at the demand. They pivot often, right? So, for example, Twitter was built as a side gig to the startup, or even a side gig of a side gig. Right? That's quite often. So I think in order to do that, you need to have a very strong talent inside your organization that is able to understand the market, adapt to it, and be quick. And I think this is something that we often lack in media industry. We launch something and we stick to it up until it's like close to death, and then we just keep it like on the back burner of surviving. And then maybe in a few years you close it, right? Like that is often the story of a startup, not always, but that is the trend I quite often see. And I think for me, the main reason for that is, of course, the industry is tough, but it's also and then it's a vicious cycle of talent, right? Like the industry is tough, so the best talent is not in this industry, and they go to different industries, and then less knowledge and brains in it. So I think, if you can get your team to be like in that position of thinking about pivoting and iterating and increasing the density of talent, that is playing a big difference. And this is one kind of lesson I see.
And I think that's really interesting because, right, we're not the pharmaceutical industry. Our R&D budgets are sometimes non-existent, right? And
Yeah.
and like for instance, it's funny you mentioned Twitter because I got to work for Medium as like an overnight news editor, kind of running their homepage, and I worked with a bit with Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter, and the thing that I noticed that was quite different about him was he was very much iterating and pivoting. But I almost think he did it too much. Like, I almost feel like he kind of broke media because he overdid it, and he would have probably done a better job had he not, like, annoyed the publisher so much with changing business models.
It's always about striking that balance, right? Of how do you understand the moment you have to pivot versus you have to get through it, and actually, like, the the El Dorado is like a few kilometers down the road, and you need to just get to there, and you need to hold tight and don't change anything. Kind of keep doing it. It's always a very hard balance to strike, but I think just having enough people to think about that and having that, let's say, strategy cap on them is something that media industry doesn't have enough, especially like if we don't look at the biggest players, right? They do have now money and resources to think about strategy and pivoting and developing non-news verticals, right? And so on and so forth. But if you look at the kind of middle players or like smaller players, I think just not have enough resources to think about that, and also keeping in mind that media industry is the industry that is inherently about the moment we are in, right? It's very hard to plan when your kind of cycle of attention is in hours, right? Like if you are like a breaking news publication, let's say you are a breaking news publication, like big chunk of your team is thinking in hours, right? How do you get those people who are doing editorial strategy from the perspective of thinking in days, hours, maybe weeks, to thinking in months, years, right? That is very hard. And for that, you need to have different sort of kind of people skill sets in the organization. And that is very, not very easy to do.
I'm just wondering, what does it take for like news organizations in a war zone to be planning their day to day, but also long term? Like for you, can you talk a little bit about what that's been like at the Kyiv
Yeah.
Independent?
Yeah. So of course. So maybe again a small a context kind of a thing for our listeners. So the Kyiv Independent is Ukraine's, I would say, biggest English language publication. It was founded in November 2021 when the owner of the previous big publication here in Ukraine called Kyiv Post essentially fired the whole editorial team because he didn't like what they were writing about. And this is then the newsroom of Kyiv Post and the consultancy team that I was working co-founded the Kyiv Independent, and this is how it was born, and this is how I ended up there. So now I balance my time between the Fix and the Kyiv Independent, and I would say, like, for the last year and a half, spending the majority of my time at the Kyiv Independent because it's been an intense ride here with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So Kyiv Independent, it was launched just a few months before the full-scale invasion. So it was essentially like a very, very young startup, right? That ended up quickly being one of the main voices of the war, growing from like 20,000 followers on Twitter to 2 million in a few weeks, and essentially becoming like one of the go-to sources for the world decision makers about what's happening on the ground. And that was a very hard transition because you need to everything changes around you, but internally you don't change that fast, right? So how do you change your organization and your team to reflect and like to kind of face the challenges around you? So the Kyiv Independent grew from like 20 people or so at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022 to now slightly over 50 people. And there was but the quantity is not just the matter, right? Like it's also about the kind of what kind of people are inside the team. We've built, marketing from the scratch, product team from the scratch, reader revenue team from the scratch, right? Like we now look into comms and like other adjuncts places that are very important to be a successful media organization. And that takes a lot of planning, to your question, right? And sometimes it's tough, right? Like it's tough mentally too. I remember the moment last year in Kyiv where Russia was attacking the energy infrastructure actively, and we had a lot of blackouts. We didn't have electricity regularly, and we were sitting in the office, and like there was no electricity. It was quite dark and quite cold in the office because the heating was from the ventilators that are powered by electricity, and we were doing the annual strategy for 2023. And we're just like drinking my beer and thinking, okay, does it make sense to do the annual strategy when you're not necessarily sure what's going to happen, in the next few weeks? But then, what we learned is that, yes, it does. It does make sense to plan, and you do need to find that time to plan, right? Like many of the things we put in that strategy at the end of like 2022 or early 2023 maybe didn't work exactly as we planned them to be, but they set the directions that helped us keep transforming the organization. For example, we launched a few new business directions. We launched the business desk, right? Like it's in our attempt to adapt our coverage to the post-war kind of news consumption. We launched research arm with an idea of like essentially when the reconstruction of Ukraine comes, we will want to be the authority that is doing the research for different investment funds, different like government players on like market analysis and stuff. Right, this is kind of a like Politico Pro kind of reference of the business model that we've started doing in 2023. Those things were very important to start. And they are yet to be built, and they are yet to, I would say, kind of get bigger as the environment changes. But you can't do that without the strategy, right? You need to find time and plan. And now as we enter into moment of planning for the next year, it's again, it's quite hard to get into that mental stage of planning. But we understand that it's necessary because without the plan, I've heard this very good phrase about I think it was a Decoder podcast. It was from the LinkedIn executive, and the phrase was that in LinkedIn they use this kind of motto: "We might be wrong, but we are not confused." Sorry for the swearing words. And I really like it. I think this really fits what I would like to do. We might be wrong, but we don't want to be confused. In that fast-changing, like fast-paced environment, we need to have a hypothesis with which we operate. Otherwise, we're just gonna get lost.
Yeah, and in some ways, maybe it's good to actually be doing that planning when you're in an internet shutdown or you're struggling with, the operational side, which is what your role is, and so you're really living it. It's not like, oh, let me imagine what this could possibly be. It's like, here's what we might be facing on a day-to-day basis, or sporadically, like what do we do, and how do we manage that? So that's super, super interesting, I think. And also, I just wonder, for a long time now, everyone's kind of attention has been turned to the Ukraine war, but then you have this other huge, unexpected conflict, I think unexpected, in the Middle East. And how does that kind of impact what you guys are doing? Are you seeing a drop in people coming to your site, or was there a drop maybe in early October when Hamas first attacked, or has that not really come into your planning?
First of all, we definitely spend time thinking about this, and it's definitely it's horrific in any case that the new war starts somewhere in the world, but it is especially I think hard for Ukrainians who the scale of the war didn't really get smaller, yet the attention started to dwindle, and that this makes a lot of people feel a bit more desperate and left out. And I think for us as the publication, Kyiv Independent is an English language publication, so we our target audience are not Ukrainians, are people around the world who want to read about Ukraine and the region, right? So those audiences, for them, what's happening in Ukraine is not it's not a matter of life and death, right? It's not it's not really that much of a service for them, more of a way of to understand what's happening in the world, right? Maybe follow something they are emotionally connected, but not necessarily face every day in their life. So that those audiences, right? You need to work much harder to keep them interested and reading you, because for them it's easier to shift their attention. We do saw a bit of a drop, but we kind of recovered from that relatively quickly. And I think specifically at the Kyiv Independent, because I think we what we were good at is we managed to build a core audience of people who really do spend a lot of time reading about what's happening, and for them, that wasn't that like they stick to reading what they read before. We saw a drop in like sources of, let's say, traffic of like from Google Discover, where people are just reading about everything and find out about Ukraine through us, but not necessarily that connected to our brand. So we saw a bit of a drop from those sources. But I would say in terms of our core audiences and our core business model, which is membership and donations, we didn't saw like a drop. So far, I think we are doing okay. But this is something definitely that we keep thinking about quite a lot, and we try to adapt, right? Like that's about strategy, like and pivoting, right? You always have to iterate and understand. Okay, the external environment is changing. How do we adapt to that? Like so, for example, one thought that we had, okay, there is a lot of competition, like in terms of coverage from big Western publication on Ukraine. New York Times, CNN, BBC having like big offices here, right? Like they shifted their attention quite a bit, even like pulled out some of the correspondents from Ukraine, right? So okay, so then now this space, maybe we do become a source for those people who didn't read us. They go and read the Kyiv Independent instead of New York Times and what's happening on the ground here, because we are providing that level of detail and depth that they are not yet now, right, providing, right? So for us, it was a moment of, okay, how do we maybe use this as an opportunity to be more useful for readers around the world? Do we hire someone from those reporters, like who are not now, like, let's say, we're now not paid by this big Western publication? Maybe do we have some kind of hiring strategy out of that? Like those were the approach we tried to take, and that is kind of how we try to adapt, and we'll plan to adapt in 2024.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been reading some predictions and some hot takes on SEO and search and how publishers kind of adapt to that, and some say search is kind of dwindling. I wonder if that's the case for you guys. There was also this great article by Brian Morsey talking about like the divorce of the publisher platform, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on like both of those topics and from your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I will put my defix kind of cap back
Sure.
on, and maybe give a bit of a broader take on how do I see it. Look, in my opinion, search is something that will definitely that will be a transformative source of traffic for publishers going forward with the coming of the generative AI and the transformation of search as it is, right, with the help of it. I think it will affect the industry quite dramatically, and that will. But the big question is like how it will affect it and what parts of the industry will be affected. Because I'm quite like I don't have that approach of like, okay, everything will be bad for everyone and like everyone will suffer. I think some will win, others will lose. So who will win, who will lose? And I think with the search, the idea that the media is not really kind of a channel, it's a brand that I think arrived like in like early 2000s and got stronger in 2010s and stuff, will get even stronger, right? Like news organization is no longer a channel, it's a brand, right? So you build yourself around the brand, not really around the channel, right? Like you have to be omnipresent in a sense, and your main value is in the brand of your institution, your journalists, right? And your goal is to ensure that those fit into kind of your business model. But and how that model works is something that you have to think about, right? Like search is driving quite a lot of acquisition and advertising revenue. Okay, how do we adapt to that, right? If you are a niche organization that has a lot of, let's say, unique content, probably you won't suffer that much, and maybe even win, right? Like maybe in a way, right? Like of your brand I'm quite sure that those kind of ChatGPT and other like projects will get to a point where they have to quote publishers, like they will not be able just to take content away. So maybe that quoting will be just another form of discovery, right? Like, and then if your content is truly needed and unique, they will go to because it's impossible to to get it kind of fully out. So if you like that expertise is only going to be available once you get to read the whole thing, not just the small excerpts from it. But if you are, let's say, I don't know, like a recipe website that is just kind of clipping those articles very fast, you will suffer, right? Like, I think that's a part of the market will get smaller, obviously, right? As that niche will be overtaken by AI, and the search will no longer be working for them, right? So for me, I think that is kind of the way I see it. For the Kyiv Independent, I've spent some time thinking about it, how it will affect us, right? I think we do have quite strong brand and that unique value that we create, that for our core model, it will not really change much, right? Like, because maybe the general kind of viewership might get a bit smaller, the acquisition will shift, but that core model of, let's say, financing our work through our readers will probably stay. And then, that unique breaking news, like a very specific breaking news thing that we offer, for example, right, or frontline coverage that we create, or documentaries that we create, will not be substituted by that shift in search, right? So those are the questions I would like, if I would be a different publisher, I would ask ourselves, right? Like, why do people really come to read us? And you need to be frank with yourself, right? Like, if they are not really coming for your brand, they're just coming for and not associate the stuff they read with your brand that much, then maybe, yes, you are in danger and you need to think, well, maybe it's a moment to pivot. But if you can answer those questions and you understand that you have unique content, your brand has your core audience has a strong connection with the brand, and you have different channels to funnel those people to learn about your brand, then I think you'll be okay. That's kind of my take on it. And to the broader question about the AI, I mean, I think my feeling is it's going to be more or less the same as with the arrival of Facebook and Google, right? Like, the biggest players will cut some direct deals, like Axel Springer just cut one with OpenAI to get their content, and they paid millions for that. While New York Times clearly didn't manage to agree on a deal, so now they are suing Microsoft, right? Those stuff will happen quite a lot, and probably for those big players, they will find a way to get some direct deals out of those companies. And then, but the middle players and the small players will suffer the most, right? And for them, maybe they will create some charities for publishing and stuff, but that is not going to be a sustainable model. So I wouldn't rely that much on money from those sources. I would really consistently question the stuff we just discussed a few minutes ago.
Given that things are moving quickly, but at the same time, I feel like in our industry, they don't move as quickly as they should. It's like we need more of a space to sort of discuss these things, and I think that's why we're setting up this journalism innovation kind of Slack channel, so we can kind of have these conversations. And also, people need to have a space to share, and not everyone can come to conferences. People are like you were, covering wars or running publications. So I think that. Yeah, the hybrid approach for sharing knowledge around this is really important. And I just wonder, from your perspective, who do you follow to stay up to date on the latest in, media, entrepreneurship, business models, and not just from a startup's perspective, but just more broadly? Who are the people who you kind of look up to, or what other publications do you follow?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky question now. I will be afraid not to mention someone, to forget someone, and
or just name two. Name two.
There are great. There are lots of great. I think that space got much more vibrant since the moment that the Fix was founded. I think we got more competition, which is good. I think, honestly, for the industry overall. I think what I appreciate is that there are more, let's say, niche kind of publications / projects that don't just take the kind of the overall news industry coverage, but go into specifics. For example, Dan Oshinsky about the newsletters. He has his great newsletter about newsletters. and he launched like a consulting company based of that. I think that's great, right? That there are some the niche authority expertise on specific areas in the market. I really appreciate the a media operator newsletter. I think he's from Morning Brew in the US, and it's great, like on the acquisitions and the kind of overall strategy. And then in Europe, I think there are lots of great podcasts, publications, Media Voices, Audience Sources, Journalism Co UK, so on and so forth. Press Gazette, I think, is great. So their data reporting is really insightful. So there's lots of stuff. I honestly don't have. I mentioned honestly more than I read on a day-to-day basis because it's. I think when you work in media, you often don't have much time to read media, as it often happens. But yeah, I think that space got much more vibrant, and I would say would be keen to follow more niche projects, right? Like something specifically on, I don't know, kind of generative AI for publishers focus, right? Or something specific on, I don't know, financial
subscriptions.
Yeah, that one is already like we can find something. But I would say even like step further, right? Like HR and media, right? Because media is a talent-driven business, right? Like this is the main asset that we have. It's talent, right? Our journalists. It's not like when you're building a factory and you have like your capital investment is into the machines and then you can change people, but the machines stay. In media, people leave and then you lose big chunk of the investment, right? So how do you do talent management in media? That is something that many people didn't really manage to answer. But there are some projects, for example, by Anita Zerina, Better Leaders, I think it's called, which we launched a specific project around leadership in media. I think it's very very good, and I'm very hopeful that we'll have more of that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are also, 2024, something like 1.5 billion people are going to be heading to the polls in elections. We've got the UK, the US, Russia. I mentioned Ukraine, but you mentioned that because it's martial law, it's unlikely there will be an election this year. But I'm just wondering, what do media entrepreneurs need to be aware of when it comes to all these different elections, both locally, nationally, but also how do you cover all that, and what do you choose to cover with so many different 50 different elections happening worldwide this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first and foremost, it depends on where you're based, what elections matter to you the most. I think my take on that is, I think it's not going to be unique. Probably it's someone already said that before, but I stick to it. Right? I do believe strongly that media are forged and built in the moment of crisis and the moment of, let's say, kind of brewing social movement, let's say, right? And this is the moment where media need to perform and excel at their highest, right? Example, Kyiv Independent got, much bigger and essentially built during the full-scale invasion, right? In that moment of crisis, we were present there to tackle that information need, and that helped increase the brand awareness of the Kyiv Independent much faster, right? Many publications are built in that moment of kind of crisis, and then elections, in a way, you can think about them as one of the recurring moments of crisis that are happening every so on, and especially in democracies, right? In Russia, now they will play. Not their role will be minuscule, right? But in US, for example, elections is such a big event that if you look at the P&Ls of media in the US, you will see that every 4 years it jumps because on the presidential elections, the amount of political advertisement stuff is much bigger, and then so from the financial perspective, it's a very different year for them. But it's also, remember the story of how Washington Post and New York Times built their subscription bases during Trump and their elections, as it was a moment of crisis, and they were reacting to it, and then people saw that kind of attack on them and subscribe to them, right? Those moments happen quite often. So for me, I think just the view I have from the strategic perspective as a publisher is you need to be ready for them, and this is the time for you to excel, right? Like if you were looking at the time where you need to do your job at your best, this is the moment you do it at your best, because this is where, like, this is when people learn about you, and this is where they actually think about media, like, consciously quite a lot. So I've read this, I think it was a very interesting theory in, I think it was by Ben Smith, that in US, like every election cycle, a new like strong media is built. Like, and then I think Huffington Post, by the way, you mentioned, right, was built like around the Obama kind of election years and come into power. And then, you know, Fox News kind of got much bigger during the Trump and stuff. So, and there are more examples. I don't fully remember them, but that was a very interesting theory, right? Like that every for presidential elections, this is a window of opportunity for a new player to come. And there is a reason for that, right? Because this is the moment where people consciously think about media, are open to change their reading habits. And it's a question of any crisis, right? Like, so be ready for that. That's my takeaway.
And do you feel like this is an opportunity to launch new products as well, like that are specifically election focused? I mean, it feels like everyone kind of watches the US election because it does affect so many different things, so many different countries. And everyone always says, I wish I could vote in that election, even though I'm not from the United States, because, it's, but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering from a publisher perspective, is this something you guys are thinking about? If Ukraine was having an election, would you be thinking, how do we launch an election land series or a new podcast specifically explaining and debunking? And
of course, no. I mean, you can think of that as like a kind of an intra startup, right? Like when something that you launch inside the organization, and for sure, like you need to. If you can create some like a specific tailored product around elections, I think do that. I mean, in the US, I think it's already became almost like expected from big publications to do that. It's like if they don't do it, they all like go behind everyone else. I think in Europe there are there are still more to be done. I think, and their space is less of an. I think that like there is a bit of a less, I think, product expertise, and that's why not every market you can see those sophisticated election products available, but you see quite a lot of them already, like I think in Europe as well. So for sure, I think if you can do that. And I think for the Kyiv Independent, we would definitely do it for Ukraine, but also we are thinking of doing this for US as well, given that our target audience is in the US. Quite a lot of our readers are in the US, and also the role that US elections will play for what's happening in Ukraine is going to be, very, very high. So we are thinking of covering that extensively and hiring a US based correspondent, as well as creating some sort of a separate editorial product for US elections.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, especially with the huge Ukrainian community in the United States. Second generation, third generation. I mean, people still are quite tied to their Ukrainian roots from what I remember, even before this war kicked off. People would proudly tell me they were of Ukrainian descent, or they'd go back and visit, or they had some connection there. So it makes sense to kind of marry those two and find some new product, or and focus on that. It's super interesting. We're coming to an end here, but it was really interesting talking to you. And I just wonder if we could sort of end on, if you had a magic wand, like what would you, and you could do anything this year, what would you do?
I think I might be repeating myself, but I will just reiterate again that if I would have a magic wand, I would increase the density of talent in the industry. Because I think that plays a huge, I would get us out of that vicious cycle, and get the brains. Like if you can't get the money first, let's get the brains first, and then look for the money with them together. I think that is something that I would do with the magic wand, and this is something that I think we as an industry should do more and more, is invest into hiring people from outside media. that bring lots of new kind of untapped expertise that we not necessarily present in the industry, right? And I mean, it's always about that balance, right? Like there are two extremes, right? Some people think that media is super unique and exclusive and like as an industry, and you can't really understand it from the outside. And then there are some people who think, media works just exactly the same as, I don't know, like a SaaS product or something. And you can do, like, you have the same approach that you can take from tech startup and have the same in the media industry. And I think both extremes are wrong, honestly. There are some unique stuff about how, the product that media have, and like it's always punching above its weight in terms of its, let's say, P&L and social relevance. It's always very different. But at the same time, we are not that unique. Like there is lots of stuff we can learn, from banking, from tech startups, from, retail, from e-commerce. So much insights out there that we should just take and adapt to our context. And we should do more of that. And in order to do that, we need to hire senior talent from other industries who would be able to rethink, adapt, learn the context of the media, of the news media environment, and produce something unique and innovative. This is something that I wish I want to do more at the Kyiv Independent, and we want to hire more of those people for like senior positions. This is something that I would advise as a consultant, and this is something I would write at the fix. This is I would do it everywhere. So let it be my New Year resolution.
And do you mean like from editorial, or do you mean product and audience and all that? Or are you thinking, or both?
I mean, honestly, I mean both. Like I would say first, I mean it from the media management perspective of getting like strong talent who would take on and, build product for media, right? Like, because it plays a very important role. Or subscription products, like if you think that, reader revenue is great, and this was a huge like kind of lifesaver for media in the last few years, but subscription products are not unique. They are present in other industries, and you can learn a lot from them. Like you can learn a lot from Medium. You can learn a lot from how Wikipedia is, for example, asking people to donate, right? Like I've been, I was talking quite a lot with Guardian folks, and many published publications in the Europe learn a lot from Guardian in terms of how do you build like a reader revenue model without paywall. And then I was talking to Guardian, I was asking them, where do you learn? Like, what is your source of learning? And they say, wait, Wikipedia. Like, let's go look at what they are doing. They mastered asking for like and pledging people to donate, right? So having that knowledge circulating is super important on the media management side, but honestly on the editorial as well, right? Like, because media are often criticized that they don't have the deep of an expertise, right? Like on different topics. And honestly, sometimes that criticism is validated, right? Media do often fail to have a deeper look in what's happening in different beats. So hiring like experts from those beats and like teaching them how to write, or like interestingly, is also like a strategy that often are taken, and something that I think I would do more as a publisher.
Brilliant. Well, Zakhar Protsiuk, we'll have to leave it there, but it was really fascinating hearing your perspective from both the Fix and the Kyiv Independent. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Dara. It was great being with you.
A big thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in today. Want to hear more interesting perspectives on news innovation and media entrepreneurship? You can join our free Journalism Innovation Network by heading over to ejc.net/network. This initiative and podcast are powered by the European Journalism Center and supported by the Google News Initiative. I've been your host, Tara Kelly, and that's all for now. See you next time.